Hello, welcome to Jason the Old Millennial. My name is Jason, speaking to you here in my basement in the great state of Kansas. Today's video, I am doing a deep dive on a group called the Traveling Wilburys, which I got CD set here. Traveling Wilburys, if you know, it's kind of this ultimate super group with members like George Harrison, Jeff Lynne, Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, and Tom Petty. They formed and made two albums together in '88 and 1990. And so I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive on how they started and kind of talk about how well their albums did and all that. Anyway, so stay tuned to hear my thoughts here on Jason, the Old Millennial. Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well here on a Monday afternoon. Come back to do another deep dive on a group that I wasn't that familiar with until this last year, about a year ago, I guess. Me and Adam from What the Gym, we did a CD exchange where I shipped him 3 CDs, he shipped me 3 CDs. Anyways, and we listened to them and, kind of give our thoughts. And one of the CDs or CD packages he gave me was this one, the Traveling Wilbury. It's got they only did 2 albums. First one's called Volume 1. Second album's called Volume 3. They never did a Volume 2, but it gets a little confusing for me. I always forget that it's called Volume 3, I guess, as a joke. Like there's a missing volume in there. That's really cool packaging. You open up here and you get a good look at the band there. There's the members of the band. Also, there's 3 discs here. There's the Volume 1, Volume 3, and then the middle one is actually DVD. Basically, close to about 30 minutes, kind of documenting how they made the first album, basically, and how they kind of got together, and how they recorded it, and how that did. Anyways, so it was a cool DVD. I really enjoyed it. It's a cool package because you get everything in this whole package, all of their songs that they recorded together. And you also get to see that documentary, which is really cool, really informative, of course. And you get to see a music video of kind of their lead song, "Into the Line." It was kind of their big song off the album, I would say. Maybe probably the most well-known song coming off here, "End of the Line." Anyways, I'll talk more about that in a bit. But yeah, I've always heard of Traveling Wilburys. Like I've heard that, these 5, famous. I remember when I was maybe younger, and I was, of course, a big Beatles fan, so I kind of, somewhat followed George Harrison in a way. And I remember him saying George Harrison was in this group. They called it Traveling Wilburys. And, of course, I knew Roy Orbison because of, songs like Pretty Woman was a huge song on the oldie station. And he was the oldest member of the group, really. Of course, Bob Dylan. I knew Bob Dylan as a kid because he made wrote so many great hits. And Tom Petty, I knew him, but I wasn't that familiar with Tom Petty's music. And then Jeff Lynne, I didn't know who Jeff Lynne was at all. I was not familiar with ELO at all as a kid. It wasn't until really recently that I kind of went through. I did a deep dive in ELO and Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers recently. Just those are like my first 2 deep dives I did when I started doing this last year. Anyway, so I got to know them a lot better. Roy Orbison, I haven't done a deep dive on him or anything. I don't know a lot about Roy Orbison, except for the iconic sunglasses and Pretty Woman, it was a huge hit, and he has some other ones. I know that some hits anyways, but yeah, so I always remember hearing about him, but didn't know anything about Traveling Wilburys. Never really listened to their music. I think I've heard like Handle with Care and Into the Line. I think I've heard of those before, maybe on the radio at some point. But besides that, didn't know anything about them. Didn't really hear I didn't know how much music they made together, or they were a huge hit at all. I really didn't know that much. And I've heard people talk about, like Adam from What the Gym, of course. He sent me this because he's a fan of the Traveling Wilburys. So I know he's familiar with their work, and I've heard him talk about them. I know Sam St. John from his channel, Sam St. John, who just got 1,000 subscribers. So big congrats to Sam. Really good, really knowledgeable YouTuber on music. And I know he's talked about the Traveling Wilburys because he's a big Tom Petty fan and Bob Dylan fan, of course, and Beatles and all that. And I know he's talked about Traveling Wilburys on his channel as well, so I know he's a fan of this. If you're watching at all, Sam, I know you know a lot more about this than I do. But anyway, so I've heard people talk about it, but never really knew if I wanted to delve into them until Adam sent me the CD set, and then of course I had to listen to it. And, and I knew, I was like, well, I can do a deep dive, even though it's going to be a very short deep dive because there's only 2 albums. So there's not as much information on this band as something else. And I don't know if you want to call it a band because they only did 2 albums together, and they really it's just a super group that kind of came together twice to kind of make music together. So I don't know if you want to fully call them a band. But I mean, you have to say it's the greatest super group ever created. I mean, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young is my favorite super group probably, but this is definitely, on paper individually, it's the biggest one. But anyways, so again, a little bit of Traveling Wilburys. Really, this was George Harrison masterminded this whole idea. He's one that kind of came up with this idea, of course, of like, hey, I'm gonna bring some of my friends together and we'll make an album together, and of course, and this, of course, was in 1988. He kind of came up with this idea of putting everybody together. At the time, he was working on an album called Cloud 9, which Jeff Lynne was producing. So, of course, him and Jeff Lynne have collaborated quite a lot. I mean, Jeff Lynne's, at this point, feels like he's more big on, ELO's not doing anything at this point. I think they kind of broken up as a group. And he's doing a lot of producing with George Harrison. He's also producing Tom Petty's first album, Full Moon Fever, around this time. So he's definitely collaborating a lot with those two, those are all members of the Traveling Wilburys. Anyway, so it's kind of, I think him, when he was working with Jeff Lynne, was like, hey, I got this idea. Let's try to get some of our friends together and form this group. And of course, they had to decide who should we get together. They went with Bob Dylan. Of course, they were all knew Bob Dylan really well. And also, he'd been a great attribute, one of the greatest songwriters of all time and artists of all time. And I'm guessing they probably knew Tom Petty because they were working with him. Jeff Lynne was working with him on his album and all that. So they were friends with Tom Petty. And then Roy Orbison, I'm not sure how they got him. That's interesting because you don't see a lot of collaborations between Roy Orbison and everybody. But of course, everybody was a fan of Roy Orbison because he was making music back in the 50s, I think, before they all started themselves. So he was definitely, the older brother in the group. I don't know. He's a guy that they all, were fans of before they started music. So, but evidently had some, ties with him. They got him into the group as well, which I think is really cool. Anyway, so they got all 5 members together, and they started with Harrison had a song that he wrote called Handle with Care. So they started with that song. It's one of the best songs on the album, in my opinion. And so they all kind of collaborated, they all got together at a musician named David Stewart, who I believe he was the guitar player in the Eurythmics, which I'm not a big fan of that band, but they all got together in his house. I don't know why. He had, the right setup for trying to record an album together. Anyways, and so they would sit in a circle, and you see in the DVD, you kind of see it a little bit better. They're kind of just sitting in this tight circle with their guitars, and they just kind of, seems like it's very casual. That's what's so interesting about the whole thing, is you have the five Hall of Fame singer-songwriters or whatever getting together, and some of the greats of all time. It's just like, powerhouse group. And they kind of seem like they just come in casually. They got their guitars, they got some songs that they're working on, and then they would sit there and work on their songs together. And I feel like they weren't together that long, and they came up with all these songs. And of course, if you're a songwriter, I think you probably already have, songs, in your back pocket that you're working on or didn't put on an album. And I don't know exactly how that worked. I'm sure they must have had some idea of what they wanted to do. And so they just started working on it and started, showing it around everybody, and everybody kind of looked at it. And then they took turns, singing some of their songs. The DVD is kind of interesting. They talk about they would, they would have someone sing us, like they wrote a song, usually they would sing it, but sometimes they say, hey, let's have, one of the other members maybe sing this part and see how it feels anyways. And so they would sing it. And then a lot of times they take turns like singing each other's songs maybe, or singing parts of the songs and seeing what worked. So it's kind of interesting how they really collaborated. Like I said, George Harrison was kind of the leader of the group. He was really one that was really running everything, organizing everything, I would say. But it was really a group collaborative effort, it seemed like. Everybody got their own songs in the album and got the lead singing and all that. One of the funniest things I thought on the DVD was Tom Petty saying like how he didn't like having to follow Roy Orbison. If they said, okay, let's have Roy Orbison sing this, and then they said, okay, Tom Petty, how about you sing it? Tom Petty always felt very, what's the word? like he wasn't good enough to sing behind Roy Orbison. Like, and I can see that Orbison maybe has the best voice in the group, to be honest. Um, Obviously, Bob Dylan's never known for his vocals. Tom Petty's a fine vocalist. George Harrison, never great vocalist, just an okay. Jeff Lynne, is a fine vocalist, but I think Orbison definitely had the best voice out of the group, even at the older age that he was. I'm not sure how old he was. I don't think he was like real old, but he was old enough. But he still had a really good voice. His voice still sounds great on this record, I would say, on this first album. And so it's kind of interesting that, even Tom Petty, who's a famous musician who's wrote tons of hits, lead sings his own, Hall of Fame band, was still kind of intimidated by Roy Orbison. I thought it was kind of funny in the DVD. But that's just how much I think, how much they looked up to Roy Orbison and all that. How much respect there was for Roy Orbison in the group. Anyways, but yeah, so they kind of took turns singing songs and kind of recording it and everything. And so, yeah, I think the first album only has maybe 10 songs on it. Yeah, 10 songs. So they all came together, 5 members. I don't know if they got 2 piece or whatever. And so they kind of got this 10 songs together. Like I said, I don't think they spent a lot of time together. So it's kind of interesting how and it's always hard when you get a supergroup together and they're writing. You have to wonder, are they putting up their A material? Because I've heard this in other, like when the Byrds did their reunion album, there's a lot of criticism that each member didn't bring their A material to the group. That, of course, they wanted to keep their A material for themselves when they do their own solo album. So you have to wonder, because these are all artists that were doing maybe solo work. I don't know if Roy Orbison was, and Jeff Lynne maybe wasn't as much, but you knew Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, and George Harrison was still writing music, still recording music. And so you have to wonder how much of their A material, but there's some really good songs here. So if it wasn't their A material, it was still really good stuff, I think, together. And of course, them combining together, it elevates the music probably in some sense. Saying that, it's still, really, really good stuff here that they brought together. It didn't take them a long time, it felt like, and they kind of recorded all. Of course, after they did that, they did these sessions where they were collaborating and writing and singing the songs. Harrison and Lynne would take the songs to England and then work on them and kind of producing them basically, and like putting drums in. Of course, they didn't have a drummer there, so then they had to put drums in the songs. They put horns into places, and then did overdubs on different instruments and stuff like that. So definitely a lot of the work was probably done in the studio, like I said, because like I said, it was just them and maybe their acoustic guitars and their singing voices, and the main thing they recorded. And then Harrison and Lynne had to do everything else basically to make the album. Anyway, so they did that, recorded the album, put it out. Traveling Wilburys. I forget who came with the idea, but they wanted to pretend like it was almost like they were pretending to be a different band. Like it was, and the idea is and they all came up with different. I know Adams talked about this, and they all came up with fake names for themselves, like Lefty Wilbury or something like that. I think was one of them, and I don't know, it's probably somewhere in here, but anyways, they all kind of came up with fake names, and they all kind of pretended like they all were this family band called the Wilburys, anyways. And the Traveling Wilburys, like they're just this traveling band, They try to take out, the individuals of themselves, because individually they're, like I said, Hall of Fame, singer-songwriters, but they want to pretend like they're just this, another band called, they're all Wilburys, and all this. Anyway, so I forget who kind of came up with the idea. I don't know if it was Harrison or somebody came up with the idea, and they kind of ran with that, call themselves the Traveling Wilburys, which is a kind of odd name, but and they just called their album, not much creativity in the album itself, just Traveling Wilburys Volume 1. Of course, it came out very successful. It came out in 1988. And I thought about this, like, imagine if you were a fan of like the Beatles even, or Tom Petty, or Bob Dylan, whatever, you would be like, oh yeah, I'm buying this album. So, I mean, how could you not buy this album when it came out? I was only 5 years old at the time, so I wasn't aware of this music, but if I was, it definitely would be one I would want to get right away to go, how could I not want to hear all these great singers collaborating together? I was thinking like if Ed Sheeran and Damien Rice and Glenn Hansard all got together and it's like, hey, we're making an album together, and I'll be like, I'll be the first in line to buy that, because and John Mayer, let's say John Mayer, I'll put John Mayer in there, some of my favorite singer-songwriters of the current time. I would say, I would be the first in line to buy that album, because I'd like to see what they would do together. Yeah, it went triple platinum, did very well, record sales wise. Critically, very praised. Critics really gave it good reviews. Even got some award nominations, including nominated for Album of the Year for the Grammy Album of the Year. So I mean, got a big Grammy nomination there. And won a Grammy for Best Rock Performance by a Duo Group. So, I mean, everything did very, very well, and finished number 3 in the charts. So, very, very successful album. Sad news, unfortunately, was that Roy Orbison would die of a heart attack 2 months after the album came out, after they debuted the album. So, very sad, of course, that one of the members died so quickly, and one of the, again, Hall of Fame singer-songwriters of all time, one of the greats, Roy Orbison, passed away here in 1988 or so. And one of the interesting things, if you watch the music video for End of the Line, they're like in a train car singing the song, and there's an empty rocking chair with Roy Orbison's picture, and I think his guitar beside the rocking chair, which is a great homage to Roy Orbison, which I thought was really cool when you watch the video. You go, yeah, it's a good remembrance to one of the greats, Roy Orbison, which is really cool. And it's cool that he got, all these nominations, unfortunately wasn't alive to see all the success of the album and the group anyway. So obviously that was a huge hit to the group. But George Harrison wanted to continue on and do another album. And so he got the other 3 members together, and they made another album in 1990 called Volume 3, like I said. Volume 3, it doesn't feel like they put as much into this one. And not saying it's a bad album, it's a fine album. Doesn't have as many big hits, I think, as the first one, in my opinion. Still some good stuff on that 3rd volume, I would say, but not as good as the first volume, of course. And it didn't do nearly as well as far as record sales. Didn't get nominated for anything. Wasn't critically appraised as much. And I think it seems like, to me, I feel like again, maybe I don't want to be too harsh, but it feels like they weren't into this one as much as the first one. I think the first one's just more exciting because, wow, this is the first time we've ever done something like this, gotten these people together. And of course, they're friends, so I'm sure they love hanging out together anyways. But I think all the excitement of that first one kind of weared off on the second one, Volume 3. And I'm not saying they didn't put their worst stuff in there. They still put some decent stuff in there, but and it seemed like Dylan was touring at the time, so he was not on the album as much. He had a very limited amount of time to even work on any songs on the album, so I don't feel like he gives much Bob Dylan on this album. I mean, Tom Petty's obviously still touring. George Harrison, I don't think did much touring at this time, but he's still somewhat active in music, and Jeff Lynne was producing and all this stuff. I feel like it's really hard to get together because they're all busy with their own stuff, and so I don't know. It didn't feel like they worked as much on this one as the first one. Still, it's okay album. And because of that, there was questions, it went number 11 in the charts, by the way. So, I mean, didn't do terrible. Still did okay. Still 4 great members, there. But I think they did lose something with Roy Orbison. Roy Orbison was such a good singer, and he had at least one really good song I remember on the first album that I really liked, which I'll talk about when I do my rankings at one point. Not Alone Anymore was a really good song from Roy Orbison off that first album. And how can I, describe these albums? Of course, if you know any of those members, you definitely got the folk, definitely a folk theme to the albums, because you got, Bob Dylan and stuff. So you got some folk music in there. It's very, I would say, maybe a little countryish, folk country maybe in there. Not a lot of country, but I mean, you got that in there. Maybe just a little bit of rock, not much rock. It's very soft, folk rock maybe style of music. Overall, not my favorite kind, but still I thought pretty good. And just, it's fun to hear an album by all these great, singer-songwriters anyways. So it's kind of something to that's kind of fun, just listening to it and going, wow, we got all these great singers collaborating together, these powerhouse, individuals. And so that's just really cool. And overall, yeah, it's not one of my favorite albums, Volume 1 or Volume 3. It's probably not gonna make into my top 100 favorite albums ever, but definitely an honorable mention type album. I definitely recommend both albums to anybody. And this is I definitely recommend. I like the set with the 2 albums and the DVD documentary is really nice. So I definitely recommend anybody. If you haven't listened to Traveling Wilburys, I think you'll enjoy it if you enjoy any of those individuals. I think there's still something really fun here. and some pretty decent music here. Like I said, no song's gonna make into like any kind of big song list, but still very, very decent songs. Like I'd give them both probably like an 8 out of 10 rankings, you know, still solid albums. And ones I'll go to at some point again. And of course, next week I'll do like a top 10 favorite songs, which it was hard to get in top 10 just because there's not that many songs, only 2 albums. But there was enough good stuff here that I can come up with a top 10 favorite songs that I could listen to overall. So yeah, so that's my thoughts here on Traveling Wilburys. Still a really cool idea, good collaboration by some of the greats. Definitely something to recommend to anybody who haven't listened to them. And something was fun. I'm glad Adam bought me that, so I got to listen to Traveling Wilburys for the first time in my life. And kind of now I know who they are, or know a little bit more about the group and all that. So yeah, so that's into my deep dive, and just thanks or please comment. What do you think about the Traveling Wilburys? Do you have a favorite song, favorite member, all that? Love to read any comments about this. And just thanking anybody watching this video, thanking anybody liking it, and a big thank you to all my subscribers. I'm at 250. Last time I saw, I'm at 250 subscribers, so that's somewhat of a, you know, cool thing to get to a good number like 250. You know, really appreciate everybody that subscribes to the channel. I enjoy doing these videos and hope people enjoy maybe watching them. Hopefully, you know, you learn something, maybe you're entertained by it, anything. Definitely love talking about music and movies and collaborating with people anyway. So, but yeah, thank you to everybody subscribed. Really appreciate you, and I hope you have a good day.